You need to be able to handle many different conflicting views. So each of the projects that we've done, we've had people protest the projects and the designs.
Yeah.
And we've had to go and either make modifications to accommodate their requests or explain to them why we're doing it a certain way. And there's influence from political side, from residents, from non-profits. There are multiple people who want things to be shaped a certain way.
Yeah.
So I think it requires a certain mindset to be able to take in everyone's point of view and figure something that is a negotiated solution of everyone's wishes.
Welcome to Everything Comes Together. My name is Sreenag and I'm an architectural photographer based in Chennai, India. My guest today is architect and urban planner Kavitha Selvaraj of CityWorks. On Everything Comes Together, I'll be speaking with people in the broader photography, architecture and design communities. Rather than only talking about their work, we will be talking about them, their personal journey, the challenges they overcame, and the most pivotal incidents in their lives that made them who they are today. So now, let's get to it. Before we get to our guest, I just wanted to let you know that the Everything Comes Together podcast has a new home online. At everythingcomestogether.com, you can watch full episodes to get the whole story, or you can watch a treasure trove of playlists. On these playlists, a variety of creatives from across the country present their experiences and opinions on a set of topics to give you a complete understanding of the work you love. Find out more at everythingcomestogether.com. Now, on with the show. When looking for a place to sit or a place to meet friends, we almost always end up doing so on private property rather than a convenient public space. Simply finding a nice path to walk our dogs or a place to dispose of our garbage or simply walk down the street can be a cumbersome task. These issues and a lot more are a part of urban planning and design. An interest in urban design is what drew me to speak with my guest Kavitha Selvaraj. After gaining substantial architecture experience in the US, Kavitha returned to Chennai to join a legacy architecture firm, CRN Architects. During her time there, while working on her passion projects, she started her own practice, CityWorks, a social enterprise created to design a better urban environment around us. Through this interview, I talked to her about how she was inspired to become an architect as a child, how she overcame personal losses early in life, and the importance of designing towns and cities that suit everyone who live within them.
So I was born in Chennai.
Okay.
And since my father was in the army, I spent my childhood years throughout the country in different army cantonments. Some years in Jabalpur, that's in Madhya Pradesh, in Secunderabad, and then in Delhi. So that's where I finished my high school from Delhi.
Okay. And you, by being transferred around a lot, did you enjoy going to new places all the time? Was that something that interested you, or was that just something that happened?
No, it was, I would say, the best childhood experience for someone to grow up in that kind of an environment. It's very unique. You really learn to be very open-minded. We never had a choice. So after a couple of years, you just pack your bags and move to a new place, go to a new school, have new neighbors. But there are some things that are very much in common, the army housing, the kind of cantonment areas where we lived, the type of relationships that we had with people around us. Those were the constants. And you learn to be very adaptable. And very open to new experiences. So I think I absolutely loved it, and I wish everyone could have that kind of a childhood, which makes you so open-minded.
Yeah, and I think as we'll be talking about, you moved around a lot for your work as well, or even studies over the years in different places, right? So that would have given you a bit of preparation for that. So you also, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that there was one particular incident that was quite pivotal at a young age, is when you guys built a home.
True. So when I was in class 2 and 3, at that time my father was posted in Kargil. And Kargil being a field posting, the family was staying in what's called a separated family quarters in Chennai.
Okay.
At that time, that was in Nandanam, which was defense quarters on Mount Road. And around that time, my parents bought a small piece of land in Nandambakam. It's a defense services officers kind of a colony, and decided to build a 2-bedroom, single-floor house. And for that, they hired a young architect, Sheila Prakash, actually at that time.
Okay.
She was just out of college. And for me, as a 7 or 8-year-old, that was my first experience with the whole construction industry, you know. And I used to go with my mother to the construction site and just watch this building come up. Very modest, small home.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating, and I was kind of hooked to this idea of having these drawings that kind of translated into 3-dimensional form. So it stayed with me in my mind and sort of set me on this idea that I should pursue architecture as a career.
So did you spend much time at the construction site talking to people as well?
So because at that time it was what would now be called a labor contract. So we would buy the bricks and the sand and the cement and make sure that it reached the site and go there and instruct and sort of interact with the masons, etc. So it was just a nice way to understand how what is drawn on a piece of paper then gets translated into a building.
Yeah. So and that sort of put you on the track.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from there, where did you go? You moved around some more after that, obviously.
Yes. So that was when I was in class 2 and 3. So then after that, I spent my middle school years in Sikandrabad, which is again a very nice place to grow up. And I had an uncle who told me that it's really important to be good at sketching if you want to pursue architecture as a career. And so I used to spend my time drawing and I was always inclined towards that. So I definitely took that, internalized that information and spent a lot of my time doing drawings and artworks and other creative pursuits. I was just interested in it, but somewhere in the back of my mind, it remained that at some point when I'm in high school, I should apply to an architecture school. It's not bad. I was not bad.
People who generally say I was not bad were pretty good at it, right? Okay. So, and I noticed there's one theme that seems to run across multiple people that I've spoken to for this podcast and otherwise, is that there's almost always an uncle who gives advice to the person who ends up doing what they're doing. But anyway, okay. So then you said you went to Secunderabad and then to Delhi, and now you're probably coming up to the time to finish school, right? So was architecture the definite next step?
So there's absolutely no other person in my family, or I had not at this point when I was in school interacted with anyone else after that who is connected to the design profession. My father was a doctor, is a doctor who served in the army for 30 years. My mom, a homemaker. And the only things that were common at the time was, medicine or engineering. I was clear that I didn't want to do either of them.
Yeah.
And because at that time my parents were transferred from Delhi to Calcutta, they were very uncomfortable leaving me in Delhi. So there was a couple of schools of architecture I could have applied to in Delhi at that time, which I had found information about, talked to the school counselor, etc. And they felt Delhi was unsafe for me to study for undergraduate education. So they said, we'll go to Chennai. If you get into architecture school in Chennai, fine. Otherwise, you'll do whatever you get into. And so I applied to WCC college and I joined computer science there.
Okay.
And I even spent 1 month in that program. Because, as you know, there was only one school of architecture in Chennai in 91. And there were just 2 seats for students who were not from Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
at that time. So the other states quota. And I applied through that quota and was fortunately one of the two who got into it. So,
And this is at SAP in...
this is in School of Architecture and Planning in Anna
Okay.
University.
Yeah.
So that was actually, now I look back, it seems like almost fluke that I got in.
But it must
because
have made you feel good, right, to get in there.
absolutely. Yeah. This was something I had wanted to do for a long time. And the
Yeah.
chances were so slim because it was the only program I applied to.
Yeah.
And the fact that I got in, I was really thrilled.
So what was your experience like at Anna University?
Around between 90s, it was actually a very solid set of teachers who were there at the school at the time, and a very open culture. I think now it's become a little more strict. It was really quite liberal at the time, and we got to travel every year. There was a travel component, the study tours,
Yeah.
and we took part in the inter-college competitions as well. Very good faculty, and we learned a lot from our peers and from our seniors,
Yeah.
because there were only 35 students in each class, and there were 5 years. So it was a very close-knit college environment. Of course, being set within the larger university, we also had friends in other colleges, like the College of Engineering and AC Tech. But I think the School of Architecture was its own little world.
Yeah. Its own little ecosystem.
Yeah, it was own little ecosystem. It was a really very positive experience. I loved it.
Was it the same building that's there today that you studied in?
Yes, it's the same building. I think so many things have not changed at all.
Okay.
I think the school has become a little more strict just in terms of allowing people to come in and out. When we were there, it was this open place where you could walk in and out any time of the day or night. And sometimes we'd spend all night working on studio projects or on NASA in the college. I think you can't do that anymore.
And you stayed on campus?
Yes, I was in the hostel.
In the hostel.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in the hostel, and that was also, I think, an important part of that whole being independent and growing up experience. Of course, I always had my grandparents' house because my grandparents lived in Chennai.
Okay.
So I'd go there sometimes for the weekends. And but yes, I spent the entire 5 years on campus.
Okay. And you'd also mentioned that you had a very difficult moment in the first year of college.
Yes, actually. So this was, my mom was actually one of the people who planted the seed of the idea of architecture in my mind when we were building this house when I was growing up. And she said, this sounds like an interesting career option. It's fascinating. And so that was one of the reasons that I actually pursued it further.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in my first year of undergraduate school, she passed away very suddenly. So just a few weeks before my 18th birthday. My grandmother at that time, who was severely diabetic, had a health setback and she died suddenly. And my parents, who were living in Calcutta, had flown down for the funeral. And for inexplicable reasons, she kind of had a cerebral hemorrhage and passed away. So she didn't get to see me become an architect.
Yeah.
But I'm sure she's very proud.
Absolutely. But that is something that you said, something that struck me at that time, where you said that made you grow up very quickly and overnight, right?
Absolutely.
And it's not a challenge anyone wants to have to face. But the thing is, when you're studying as you said, when you're just 18, that sort of thing sort of steals you towards becoming a stronger person.
Absolutely.
Going forward.
So I think it was a huge shock, naturally.
Yeah.
And I was already quite independent as a person, but this set of circumstances made me completely be self-reliant and sort of take care of a lot of things on my own.
And now, moving forward from this was in your first year.
Yeah.
And in your second year of college, there was a big project that you guys worked on was in Tanjavur.
Right. So as I was mentioning, at that time, and I think even now, schools have a very interesting way of bringing together students from various architecture schools. So the National Association of Students of Architecture has these annual meets where along certain themes, different schools put together projects and then they sort of compete, if you will, against each other. So we took part in a competition which was focused on developing the area in and around the big temple in Tanjavur.
Yeah.
And I was part of a team. Of course, I was only in my second year, but I was part of this team which was led by seniors.
Yeah.
To look at how the urban environment could really complement the redevelopment and bring more tourism and sort of upgrade the infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was my first exposure to looking at something that was beyond the scale of a building, because we were still looking at, a cottage and a nurse, primary school. Those are the kind of buildings you're looking at in your first few years in architecture. But for me, I was fascinated by the scale of looking at how, through good design, you could impact the built environment. And of course, our group went on to win a prize in that competition as well. And so it got me thinking about a scale bigger than that of a building, and that sort of stayed with me throughout the rest of my undergraduate degree as well.
Yeah.
The fascination of not only the building in itself, but also its
What
connection,
goes around it.
its connection to the larger built environment.
And was there any one person who sort of inspired you with this, or sort of said something that got you really interested in public spaces?
There were several of our seniors who were very focused on guiding this project, but also some faculty members at the time, Professor Ravi, Professor Rani come to mind, who were really good at introducing that sense of scale to us as architecture students, the sort of general awareness of the larger scheme of things.
Okay. So now this is the second year.
Yeah.
But there was one more that I really like to hear about was your thesis at the Madras Government Museum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, they really guide us to do design-oriented projects in architecture, because obviously you are a B.Arch student, but I was by this time quite fascinated by urban issues. And so I wanted to somehow combine architecture and urbanism. So for my thesis project, I looked at the museum complex in Egmore, which is actually not so different than it is now.
Yeah.
And
not at all.
And I thought it would be very fascinating to look at it as a kind of a cultural hub or a cultural core. And I focused my thesis on additions to existing heritage buildings and looked at that as an area of focus. And I was so excited about my project. I even went back to the museum and I made a small presentation as a 22-year-old saying, look, I have all these ideas for Chennai Museum to be, a world class.
So how did you even get that appointment? Did you just...
I just walked in.
And they gave you an appointment straight away?
Absolutely. I just walked in and said, I've done this. I've studied your building. I've made drawings of your building and I have some ideas on what it could be like. And they were like, yeah, sure, no problem.
So that's a lesson to anyone who is watching this, is if people think, I'm not going to get an appointment, no harm in trying.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I can tell you now, so many years after that, I still do that.
Yeah.
If I have an idea or if I have a thought and I want to share that with someone, I just knock on the door and say, hey, can we speak about it?
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, they always say yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'll be surprised how open people are.
So how did that go finally? I mean, did the museum
Nothing came out of it.
Okay, obviously, because as I mentioned to you, I used to go to the museum. My mom used to take me there a lot when I was a young kid. And I used to think that why is there no place to, sit and have lunch after we're done with the museum, and we'd end up crossing the road and buy sandwiches from that Bombay sandwich wala.
Yeah.
And then we'd head back. So there was no place to just sit within the museum itself.
True.
Which would have been...
That started for me a lifelong interest in museums. So even now, wherever I travel, I just love to spend time in museums. It's just, I think, the idea of storytelling and having that connect to the past and many times to the future, because there's also a contemporary gallery there. So it's very fascinating.
Yeah. So now this is your time in school, your time in your bachelor's in architecture. And then from here, I think the next chapter that we're going to talk about has 3 important passages in the US, right? So you went to study your master's.
Right.
So let's just start by talking about your time in Austin.
Yeah. So I applied to the University of Texas at Austin as one of, I think, applied to 6 schools. And what fascinated me about this program was that it had a traveling fellowship. So in the first semester of our program, the entire studio traveled across a lot of the Southwest. So it was a really fantastic experience with a professor, very senior professor. He was a British professor in urban design.
Okay.
And we traveled to New Mexico, Arizona, in and around Texas. We went to Mexico City also.
Okay.
And a few other places in Mexico. And so that really opened my eyes to a lot that can be done just in terms of the built environment.
Yeah.
And of course, the experience of living in another country and the, sort of learning from other cultures was also very positive. So I really enjoyed my 2 years that I spent there. The program was more theoretical. So in addition to the travel component, we had a lot of courses built around urban design theory and site planning and, of course, architecture courses.
Yeah.
And I also got a chance to do one summer in England.
Okay.
Where we, we traveled and we made lots of sketches and saw lots of interesting buildings. So those were 2 very good years with a lot of exposure.
Also, when you said it was Southwest US, they have very, very distinct architecture style in the South especially, right? It's because there is the Mexican influence is very clear.
Exactly.
Now, since you said you were looking a lot at public spaces in these places, I don't have a great deal of experience traveling around the US. But one thing I noticed is things are very structured in how they want roads to be, and there are a lot of the regulations which are followed, right?
Yeah.
Were there some influences in the places that you went to which were more culturally driven?
Yeah.
Unique to them?
So, in all my travels, I always noted a couple of things. One is that there was a very strong emphasis on protecting and sort of projecting history.
Yeah.
And for example, there are these pueblos in New Mexico, very beautiful earth architecture. A lot of it is gone. I think just the foundations in some of these places are remaining.
Yeah.
But the way in which it is preserved, the way in which the story of the past is shared, I was very impressed that with whatever little history is there, it's communicated so effectively. And in our country, whenever I saw all these places, there were some things that were just maybe 100 years old, but it was so well preserved and story told so well. I used to always think, oh my God, we have like 1,000 times the number of things that we could talk about.
Yeah.
I wish that, those were documented and shared as well as these. So this was something that stayed with me always. And of course, another thing that was stayed in my mind was we'd gone on a trip to San Antonio. And there the city has done remarkable work in converting a river which was not unlike our Kuam into a very fantastic urban public space. So they basically re-engineered the course of the water channel and built these very nice walkways around it at a sort of a level difference from the street.
Yeah.
And the fact that people could put their minds together and make these changes happen.
Yeah.
Sort of.
And when did they do this? I think
this happened in the maybe 70s, 60s, 70s.
Okay.
So the fact that these are affected, these don't happen overnight magically.
Yeah. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work, and people before us have done this in other places.
Yeah.
So there's no reason why we can't do these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about the Kuam, I think that's something that really...
No, you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised at the story of every great riverfront that you can see anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Starts with it being a completely degraded space. It could be the Seine, it could be the Thames, it could be rivers in Germany.
Yeah.
They all have a story where it was not what you see, what it is today. So people have turned those things around.
Yeah. So there's something else that you said about your time in Austin was that this was the first time you'd ever been out of the country.
Right.
So what was that like when you had left your family and friends and all back home?
Right. So it was my first international flight that I took at the age of 22, and I never flown out of the country, but I traveled on my own and just landed in a new place. I had my sister's friend came to the airport and picked me up, and it was just all very, everything's very big in Texas. It's huge. The portions of food they serve you are huge.
Yeah.
And just very vast open spaces.
And distances between places, right? Because you wouldn't have had any real transportation there.
Absolutely. Just distances between places. Of course, I did learn to drive and I got my license and all of that.
Sure.
But it was a very new cultural experience. But being from a background where I was quite comfortable going to new places, I embraced it.
Yeah.
I was like, there's always something to learn from all these people. So that was good.
And so what did you do by the time you were done in Texas?
So then I wanted to work. I applied to a couple of offices, both in Chicago and in St. Louis.
Okay.
And was very fortunate, got a job offer from a mid-sized firm in Chicago, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go to a firm which was very large where I would get lost, and neither did I want to practice in an office which is very small with just 2 or 3 people, because I always had this at the back of my mind that I want to return to India. Right. So the smaller offices do a lot of residential and smaller type of construction, which is not relevant to our context. So I wanted to work in a firm that did mid-sized projects. And we had about 40 people, and I worked there for about 3 years. Absolutely loved it, because Chicago is a wonderful city for anyone, but specifically for architects.
Yeah,
it's got some very historic buildings, and it's got very nice urban spaces.
Yeah.
So I know people say that the winters are awful, but I even love the winters.
I did too. So actually, was it hard getting a job in the US?
Very hard.
Yeah, because it seems to be hard now. How hard was it back then?
It was very hard. So I was seeing a friend of mine and who I met in college, who I'm married to now for 20 years. And he was in school at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, which is about 2 hours from Chicago.
Sure.
So I really wanted to find a job in Chicago. And so basically I moved there without a job, stayed in his cousin's place and knocked on many doors. And everyone, getting the first job is always hard because everyone's always saying, we're looking for someone with experience.
Yeah.
And regardless of how I spun the story of my resume, the fact was I didn't have any experience because I did 5 years in undergrad, went straight into 2 years in master's. So basically I had the only experience I had was some internships over the summers, which I had done throughout, but that was not substantial. And so once I sort of figured out the office that I really wanted to join, I was very persistent.
I think that is understating things when we talk about the story.
So I met the person there who was in charge of recruiting and I said, I really, really want to work here. And he said, look, we just have, you sound very enthusiastic and you come from a good program, but we literally don't have any place for you to sit in our office. And then I called him again after a week and then again after 2 weeks. And then I said, in the course of conversation, he happened to mention that, look, we have an intern from Ireland who's come in. He doesn't have any place to sit either. He's sitting in our basement building models. And so that's how short on space we are at the moment. And that's why I can't offer you a job. And I said, it's okay, I'll sit with the intern in the basement and I'll also build them. I'll assist the intern in building models. And so he finally gave up and he said, it's fine. Okay, you're willing to sit in the basement and build models. Go on and join us. And so that's how I got my first job. And
what were the kind of projects you worked on there?
It turned out to be the most fabulous decision that both my boss took and I took in sitting in the basement and building models, because I got to work on building a model for a large redevelopment project which was set in St. Louis.
Okay.
It's called Couple Station, and there were these warehouse buildings that were being converted into office and commercial space. And so there I was in the basement working on this model and came up with this idea of covering the spaces between the buildings with big atrium, which turned out to be a big hit with the clients. And so I was thereafter promoted from the basement to the first floor.
In the office.
Into the first floor. And then I got to work on that project for a year after that as well. So yeah, the first job is tough, but...
Did you do much public space projects at this firm?
So we did Couple Station, which was a redevelopment project on which I worked on for a while. And one of the nice things about American offices is it's very merit-based. So every time we went into a meeting, my boss would always tell the client, it was this young architect's idea that we do this project like this. So they were very open about sharing credit, which I really enjoyed, that culture, the office culture. And
that must be something that has translated into how you work here as well,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Credit really doesn't get around very much.
I haven't forgotten that it takes a team to put things together. And that is from my first job to this day. Architecture is not a solo practice at all. I think if anyone says that, they are not being truthful. It's a team sport. And yes, an idea can come from anywhere, and it takes many people and many craftsmen and many contractors, and the client has a very big role. It takes a lot of people to put that together. It's true for an architecture project, but more so for even public space projects. It's really a team effort.
Now, when you were in Chicago, you said that Chicago has great public spaces, right? So how long were you in Chicago for?
So I spent 3 years there.
So you must have gone around
Yeah.
the different neighborhoods and
Traveled a lot, not only within the city, but also, of course, it's a home of Frank Lloyd Wright. And so
Yeah.
then we went and saw many interesting buildings in and around Chicago, but also traveled to other parts of the United States from there. Professionally, at that time, I was beginning to realize we were working with a lot of developers at that time, and I was beginning to realize that my education was very focused on design, and really decisions in the built environment are not based only on design. They are based on financial considerations, they are based on governance, on rules, and all of those things. And so I was starting to think that I wanted to study further and look at urban development much more closely. So I was getting ready to sort of apply for a second master's at the time, though my office was not very happy with my decision.
right.
But I thought I had spent 3 years in this firm, and I thought it would be a good idea to get another master's degree, which covered those things which I felt had not been covered in my previous education.
Yeah. And so where did you apply?
So I was also around that time, we had decided, I was married by then, and we decided that we would return to India.
Okay.
And so this was something I wanted to do before I returned to India. So I applied only to one program at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And they offered a post-professional master's that was on the theme of real estate and urban development. That was called an MDes program. It was meant for people who already had either a master's degree or several years of work experience.
Yeah.
And I applied to that program, and I met a professor who was heading the real estate department there. And I gave him my background, and I told him, this is what I'm interested in, why I'm interested in this. And he said, yes, do apply. We'll see what we can do. And I was fortunate that I got in.
Yeah.
And I was very excited about that because it covered a lot of things that I had not had exposure to. So, for example, the educational environment in Cambridge itself is very unique.
Okay.
You can take courses at MIT, you can take courses at the Harvard Business School, at the Kennedy School of Government, any of the...
So you're not limited to only your department.
You're not limited to the design school.
Yeah.
And by this time, I was sort of beginning to realize that design is a byproduct of so many other things.
Yeah.
So I took those opportunities and actually took a course in the business school, took a course in the Kennedy School of Government,
Yeah.
audited some classes at MIT. And essentially, they allowed us to build our own program. I also did a studio when I was there at the GSD, which was based in Shanghai.
Oh, okay.
No, actually, it was based in Hangzhou, which is about 2 hours from Shanghai,
Okay.
and looked at the development of the city of Hangzhou in the future. So it was one of those future scenarios development type of projects.
Right.
And the GSD has fantastic professors who come and teach. Each studio is very much ahead of its time in terms of the challenges that they look at, in terms of the design issues that are addressed,
Yeah.
and set all over the world. The studios are all over the world. The students who come there, 80% of them come from all over the world. And you really meet people. I met people from every continent.
It's a great deal of exposure.
Yeah, huge exposure. And the professors as well, they don't restrict themselves to professors from any one country. You have professors from all over the world who come there
Yeah.
to teach. So that really opened up my interest in so many things, and
Yeah.
you sort of look at the world differently as well.
So at this point, you had spent time studying in India, and then within the US, you studied in a couple of places, and
Yes.
then you worked in Chicago, but you
Yes.
also spent a little bit of time in England,
Yes.
and now a little bit of time in China.
Yes.
And now that you've obviously been working in India now for about 20 years now.
Yes.
So,
Close 20 years.
so what is the one common thread that sort of goes between each of these different places that you've either studied or practiced in? Is there something like that? Is there something that's common apart from the fact that all places need public spaces?
I don't know if I can put my finger on what is common, but I think my experience out of each of these places has been to take away what is universal.
Yeah.
I think everywhere people make a lot of difference, and at the end of the day, everyone, we have so much in common. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
We are not as different as we like to think we are.
Yeah.
I think that was my takeaway from having met and interacted with people
Yeah.
from all over the world. We are fundamentally so similar, it's surprising.
Yeah.
And the differences come, I guess, with the institutions we create. Like what's possible to do in the US is maybe not possible to do here, or what's possible to do in China is not possible to be done in the US. And that's because of the institutions that we have created as a society that either enable or don't enable us to make those changes.
Yeah.
So I think the difference I realized is not so much with capacity or design ability or with talent or with people, but then it's how we come together and what we can do when we are together. I think that is different in different places.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense because so I have had a few opportunities of speaking with architectural photographers from different countries. So I've spoken to people in a couple of countries in Europe and in the US and in India, different parts of India as well.
Yeah.
Now, all of us shoot buildings,
Right.
But all of us have the same problems with
Yeah.
different projects.
Yeah.
And all of us like to have certain things. So
Yeah.
the problems are very much similar in terms of permissions to shoot things,
Yes.
getting the buildings or the interior spaces to be set up a certain way when it's been changed after the project's been handed over.
Correct.
And expectations from the client is always different. For each person, every client is different.
Right.
But if you talk to other photographers, they would say the same things.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So the things are similar across the world, and it sort of is validating that, all our cities look so different,
Yeah.
but some of the problems remain the same everywhere.
Absolutely.
But also some of the solutions remain the same as well. Even though that there are differences, there is so much linking everything up.
So I think one of the things to really remember is that you, from an experience or an interaction, you take away the principle, because that principle can be applied elsewhere.
Yeah.
The exact context may be different, but the essentials don't really change much.
Yeah.
So, I'm jumping ahead, but in the last couple of years, I'm part of a conference where where a bunch of people from civil and architecture backgrounds come together, and there is a conference that's held every year in different places. And so I have actually shared some of our experience of the public space projects here to a very international audience. And I'm surprised at how many people can relate to those problems. Whereas we think that those problems are so unique to our city and it's so specific to us, but you'll be surprised at the universality of those constraints.
Very validating.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Let's now talk about your return to Madras. right? Common question you would have been asked is why you came back. So why did you come back?
Definitely, I was asked that question many times. I never went with the intention of staying there forever.
Yes.
So it was always a question of when I would come back, not if I would come back. I think it's a combination of a few different factors. One being that I thought I could make more of a difference here than be one amongst many, many design professionals there. That was one reason. Second is, to be honest, I think being raised in an army background, your sense of patriotism is a little high.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me that I should be a citizen in any other country other than my own. So that was the second reason. And third is, I did want to raise children here. I felt that our city is the right place to have children, to raise them. So I guess both for professional and for personal reasons.
Solid reasons.
Yes.
So when you came back, you joined Mahindra.
So yes, I was fresh with my whole urban development background. So at that time in Chennai, this was before Mahindra World City is what it is now.
In Chengalpet.
In Chengalpet. It was called Mahindra Industrial Parks Limited. And there was 1,500 acres of land, which the company was trying to figure out what to do with it. So I thought that was a good opportunity to work on a project of that scale. So I joined their team. I was with them for 2 years. And during that time, we kind of conceived of it as a combination of a live-work environment. So there was housing, some recreation, offices that was planned and sort of branded as Mahindra World City. So it was nice and interesting to be part of that journey. It was also the time when India brought out the SEZ laws that came into place around that time, the special economic zone.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, early 2000s. So that those change in laws allowed some of the development there to happen the way it did.
Mm. And when you were at Mahindra with the World City, you were on the other side of the table to where you are today.
Exactly. So I actually enjoyed that position a lot, and one part of me wanted to continue as well. But I was on the developer side of the table, and I kind of missed getting into design itself, though I do acknowledge that the client plays a significant role in the outcome of many design projects. But there's something nice about getting your hands dirty and actually sketching the solutions. So I missed that, and then I decided that it was time to get back to the design side of the project. Yeah. So that's when I joined CRN, which is of course a family firm.
Yes.
So from 2004 onwards, I was part of the family firm.
So this is, as you said, your husband's family's.
Yes.
It's a generational legacy firm almost, right?
Yes.
So your husband also moved back at the same time as you?
Yes. Okay. We both came back in 2002.
Okay.
And he joined CRN straight away. I worked with Mahindras for 2 years. And after that, I joined CRN. And I was very lucky that in the first year of my working there, we had participated in a design competition for a building for HCL Technologies for a campus in Bangalore. That was in 2005. And we won that competition. And that actually shaped a lot of things that were to happen in the future, because it sort of was the beginning of a long relationship with the company as a client. And I've been working with them now for 16 years. Yeah. So that was the first sort of large project that I was involved in.
Yeah.
Kind of from a design point of view, which is sort of my baby.
So, you joined CRN, you said 2004, right? Over the next several years, you worked on a huge number of projects with them. What were the types of buildings? What were the types of projects that you did?
So, since the firm does a wide variety of projects, during those initial years, HCL was a commercial sort of office campus was a predominant building type I was involved in.
Okay.
But I also did some industrial buildings and some master plan projects as well.
And these were all larger scale projects?
Yes.
None of the smaller homes and offices type of thing?
No, in the initial years, I didn't work on any small projects.
Right.
Subsequently, I did.
Yeah.
But in the initial years, all the projects I worked on were fairly large scale projects.
A lot of the people that I speak to, most of the people whom I've spoke to on the podcast, they've either started their own company, so that creates its own set of challenges getting your business off the ground, right? Now you are joining a firm which has been there for decades by the time you got in.
Right.
Was it a bit liberating to have the freedom to do your work without needing to worry about getting the business off the ground?
Absolutely. Because what it allowed me to really focus only on project delivery.
Right.
So we were not worried about the rest of the sort of administrative challenges that come with managing a firm.
Yeah.
So like with any of, if anyone, it was no different than my working in my office in Chicago.
Right.
You have a responsibility, you're assigned a project, and your job is to get the project delivered to the satisfaction of the client. So with that being the focus, we really gave it our all in terms of our commitment to the customer.
Yeah.
And that was free.
And you would have had a much larger team to play with, I assume.
Yes, because the projects are a little larger in scale.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, now more so, but even 15 years back, it takes a lot of different specialists to come together to put together the projects. So I was really lucky to be part of good, solid teams.
So now you've had a lot of experience working on these large-scale projects, office buildings, and Mahindra World City, and HCL's buildings. I'm going to jump forward to 2015, but before I talk about what happens in 2015, I just wanted to ask you, now that at this point you've had 15-20 years of working, right? During that time, in your own mind, did you have an idea saying that I like working more with public spaces, or I like working more on private buildings and spaces? Was there anything like that?
Yeah. So I have always maintained my interest in public space ever since I returned. So even from 2002, be it approaching CMDA for any possible opportunities for collaboration. After that, in 2004, there was a call for interested citizens to come together to improve their neighborhoods. And this was driven by Mylapore Times. At that time, it was a newspaper article. Goethe Institute and Mylapore Times called for citizens to be engaged in celebrating their neighborhood. So we joined that discussion, and the outcome of that was we created something called Number Mylapore.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
which was a sort of a non-profit trust that was formed to talk about the heritage of Mylapore, and we used to conduct these walks in and around this neighborhood. So this was in 2004, and that led to a couple of other things that were focused on trying to see how to make the experience of someone who was in the city, either as a visitor or as a resident, make that experience better for them. So in 2007, we collaborated with Raj Cherubal, who's now the CEO of Smart City, and we actually approached the Commissioner of Chennai Corporation, looking to see if we can improve the pedestrian infrastructure in the city.
Yeah.
At that time, the footpath was at 1 foot height.
Yeah.
And the government always said that it was because it was to prevent people from parking on the
Cars.
Parking two-wheelers on the parking. But at that height, no one ever used those footpaths.
Yeah.
So we did this sort of demo project on LB Road, where we said, let us design a proper footpath and demonstrate to you that, if it's done nicely, people will actually use it for walking. And that was the very beginning of the public space initiatives that some of us, so there were a group of interested citizens at that time who all had this common idea that the pedestrian infrastructure in Chennai should be better.
Yeah.
And one thing led to the other. And the timing of that was also right, because at the national level, there was a mission and a movement towards upgrading and spending on cities' infrastructures with the JNNURM, which was a predecessor to what is now called the Smart City initiative. So
this was in 2007 when you did LB Road?
Yeah, LB Road was around 2007. And that led to a little bigger project, which was at that time called 26 roads or something like that, because we'd identified different stretches of bus route roads to see how you can improve the last mile connectivity. So people who are traveling by bus, once they get on at the bus stop, how easy is it for them to walk to their, walk into their neighborhoods. So I did a couple of roads at that time, Police Commissioner
all
Road.
Those, all the work that you did, are they still in place today?
Yeah, that's the fascinating part.
Huh.
The outline of it is still there. You can, the alignment of the road, some of the footpaths are also in good condition. But of course, some things have then subsequently been encroached on, etc.
Yeah, like 13, 14 years.
Yeah, it's a long time. But slowly and steadily, this has become mainstream with the work that corporation is doing, which was one or two odds and ends we were doing at that time. Now it's become part of the system itself.
Yeah.
In fact, a few years afterwards, so each time we did a project, we tried to understand what can be done to scale this effort, because we realized that giving the detailed drawings for one street and standing on the road and getting it implemented is not scalable for the size of city that we have.
Yeah.
So I did a program along with ITDP and School of Architecture and Planning, which was designed to build capacity within the system.
Yeah.
In fact, the outcome of that was this public space design toolkit, where we actually taught people, what is the right of way design and how the streetscape should not be car focused, but should rather be pedestrian focused.
Yeah.
And some of those have gotten mainstreamed into the system now. So a lot of that happened in parallel with all the other projects that I was doing.
Okay. So coming back to 2015 now. So in 2015, you started a very big project in Kanchipuram.
That's right. So between 2005 and 2015, we were continuously doing work for HCL Technologies for their corporate buildings. But at that time, I also did some work which was not directly connected to the corporate buildings. We did some school work for them for a school. And I also did a restoration project for Mr. Nadar's personal residence, which was near Tiruchendur. So even though I don't have any direct background as a sort of restoration architect, this was something that was a small house which he wanted me to do, which I worked on. In 2015, he was approached by the Kanchi Mutt for a contribution towards the Kumbhabhishekam of the Kamakshi Amman temple. And at that time, it was decided that he would sponsor that work, not only financially, but also with the supporting technical team. And I was part of that technical team.
Okay.
So it was an opportunity to really work with multiple stakeholders to be part of this effort to restore the temple and build the area in and around the main temple. So we didn't do anything. The core temple, of course, remained untouched beyond some cleaning, etc.
Yeah.
But the area in and around the temple, 5 acres is the extent of the temple complex.
Yeah.
So we completely redid the infrastructure there.
And you did this independently, or was this part of, was CRN as an entity?
Yeah, so I mean, I did this in my individual capacity.
Okay.
Because the client had put together this small team, and this was sort of done for the temple.
Yeah.
But of course, some engineers from CRN were also involved.
Yeah.
At this time, we had decided that post the restoration, we would do a documentation of the work that we had done.
Yeah.
And also build it further into doing some kind of walks around the temple and its temple precincts to talk about the heritage, to talk about the art and the architecture. So around this time, again, it was an opportunity to get into the larger scale of things and look at the cityscape as a whole rather than it as only one building.
Yeah.
And I also decided to formalize all the work that I was doing with public spaces and sort of created a new entity, which was called CityWorks, which was focused on improving the built environment from the perspective of cities itself. And this was an important step because it brought a structure to some of the things that we were doing around education, awareness, capacity building, training, research, and actual design.
And this allowed you also to build a dedicated team purely to work on these projects.
Because I realized that the day-to-day practice of an architecture firm is so consumed with sort of meeting immediate deadlines, challenges, and firefighting on some of our projects, that if we have to focus on something that is almost non-solicited, like some of the work that we were doing is not really, it's grassroots, it's driven by our own interest, you need to have a dedicated team to focus on that if you want to further those interests. So CityWorks has its own space, it has its own set of...
which is where we're sitting
right now.
Yeah.
Its own architects, and our mandate is to see what and in what capacity can we do something to improve the urban experience. It could be waste management, it could be water treatment, it could be upcycling, it could be design of parks, better pedestrian facilities, signage, history, storytelling.
Anything that you see in a public built-up space. Anything
that makes living in the city a little bit better.
And since you're doing this type of work, and you talked about a lot of research and everything, so that means you've been doing a lot of documentation of all your projects as well.
Yes, one of the things we realized is that when you start to look for information that is specific either to our heritage or to public space, a lot of stuff is not available in an organized manner. So every project that we do, we're trying to put together details and drawings and narratives so that records of those stay with us, but also we are happy to share it with anyone who wants to do similar projects in the future. So for example, the entire work around the Kamakshi Amman temple restoration, we put it together in a book, which has the drawings and the details that are now available for someone if they decide to take up a similar work.
And that's the book that you have here.
There's a copy of the book that we have here.
Yeah.
And
so as I was saying, it's like a proper resource, right?
Yes.
Someone knows that they're not starting literally from scratch.
Right.
If someone was to read this, it would at least give them an inkling into what to expect while they work on the project.
Right. And it's not perfect by any means, but I think it's really important that we build a culture of documentation and sharing of knowledge, because the things that we have in India as challenges with respect to our built environment, everything is multiplied by thousands of times.
Yeah.
So it needs that anyone who does good work should definitely, keep that record available for others to learn from it.
Yeah. So, so now you started CityWorks in 2016.
2016.
Yeah. And you've been working full time with CityWorks since then, or how do you do your own?
It takes up a small part of our time.
Okay.
Still handling mainstream sort of architecture projects takes the majority of my time in the day. But we make sure that about 10-20% of our time is spent towards these public space projects. We're very fortunate. We were able to do a park for children with disabilities recently, which actually won an award. It's in Santhome.
Yeah.
Where we focused on how to make our common spaces accessible to children of all abilities. And while every park should ideally be like that, we started with one, and now we've gotten some more interest in trying to retrofit some of the other public parks as well. And we're creating 2 more parks like that right now. Likewise, all streets should ideally be disabled friendly.
Access for everyone.
For everyone.
Yeah.
So we're starting with a few projects like that here and there. And now the government itself has expanded that into a fairly large initiative. And I think currently in the news I saw a few weeks ago, there's a plan to do 100 kilometers of, it's called the Mega Streets Project. They're going to redo 100 kilometers of roads in Chennai.
Okay.
So that is something that's really nice to see. It's a big change from where I was, in 2002.
It's a big change.
Come a long way. In terms of the way in which we see our cities. So that's really good to know.
So you said majority of your time is still on architecture projects?
Yeah. So a lot of our time is spent on architecture projects. In fact, recently we've started a new studio called Trilog Studio, where we are going to focus on sustainable buildings. So we want to do some of that. So these are all different interests. I think all of that finds time. I also very interested in teaching. Yeah. So every year I do try to spend some time in teaching as well.
Yeah. And you didn't start CityWorks alone, did you? I mean, in the sense that...
My partner in CityWorks is my sister.
Okay.
Her name is Anuradha. Her focus is on waste management. Because one of the things we realized that the common challenge for us to upgrade our built environment is really how we handle our waste. And so we've got now some in-depth experience in terms of what should be done with each waste stream. But of course, because she lives in Bangalore, there's not that much we're able to actively do here. But we are building some tools which can be shared as a resource. Yeah. So one of the things we've done is we've done a book called Trashonomics, which is a translation of a book which was done in Bangalore.
Okay.
It was there in English and Kannada, so we've translated it into Tamil. And we're rolling out a program in corporation schools to teach children how to think about waste management. And that's... in fact, if it were not for COVID, we'd have rolled that across 50 schools this past year. But now, since everything is online, this is not something we wanted to do online. So we really believe that looking at every aspect could be consumption of our own resources, to upcycling, to handling waste to how to treat wastewater. All of these things all play a role into how we can shape
Yeah.
the built environment.
Yes. There's another thing that I'd been meaning to ask you was that I'm particularly interested in urban design and planning of public spaces, as you know. Now, I've spoken to as many people as I can about this, and I noticed that most of the people that I speak to who are interested in it or working in it, they are not the younger generation of architects who are stepping out of college. Is this something that is this a challenge that you face, getting more younger people also to get excited or interested in it?
I think that when I just finished college, I also didn't find any opportunities in this field, even though I was interested.
I mean, you were interested.
Even though I was interested in the field, I didn't find that many opportunities. So definitely it is, there is no fixed path by which someone can sort of work in this space. Increasingly, there are some more opportunities because there are firms and the government itself is doing projects in this space. So there is some more opportunity. But I also think it's because of perhaps maybe lack of exposure, that if you see enough and more of the certain sort of well-designed built environment, you'll maybe want to be part of the creation of that. I think the number of opportunities are also less in terms of what projects are out there.
Yeah.
Slowly increasing. I think in Ahmedabad, there are some successful public space projects, but they're not to the extent that, you know, a young architecture graduate can see it and say, oh, who designed this? I want to be part of the firm that made this happen. So I think it's a combination of both, not enough opportunities and also maybe not awareness in that space.
Is that something that you're also looking to change, to bring that level of exposure?
So whenever I teach, I always make sure that a student who is in the design field is made aware that while it's important to design one building, how that building fits into the bigger context is an important part of that puzzle as well. And so shifting the lens or the focus to the bigger picture, I think, is something that I definitely want other people to be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're going to switch away from the professional side that we have been talking about for some time, is the fact that it's very important to you. I understood when speaking to you the other day about the role of the family and your particular role as a parent and a mom to...
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I think anyone who... I think life is not unidimensional. So one very important aspect of who we are as people is really how we function as a spouse and as a parent. And so I've tried to take a balance out as much as possible in terms of spending time with my kids, who are, of course, no longer very small, and they're
kids.
Yeah, they're 15 and 18. But made sure that there is a good balance in terms of the time that they spend. In fact, they make fun of me because whenever we travel somewhere and I'm taking pictures of footpaths, they're like, there she goes taking pictures of footpaths and dustbins and signage, and the standing joke in the family now. Yeah,
and speaking of the family, the family is an architecture-based household, right?
That's true.
Does work follow you home, or does home follow you to work all the time?
Yeah, unfortunately, the lines are too blurred.
Doesn't help that
and
everything is very close by as well physically.
It's true. It's I don't.
But how do you manage it? I mean, do you get a chance to switch off from work? No.
I actually
no.
I don't. I mean, I try to, and I think travel is a big way of getting away. Of course, in the last 1 year, none of us have been able to travel.
Sure.
But that's one way of sort of being in a different environment. But otherwise, when we are in Chennai, it's the lines are pretty blurred between work and home and
and there's
public
no one
space.
there to say, let's stop talking about architecture and design at home.
Correct. That's true. That's true. But honestly, I'm one of the lucky people who really loves what I do.
Yeah, it's
So,
true.
Not complaining about that at all.
Yeah. That's a good place to end this conversation.
Thank you.
There's nothing like enjoying what you do.
That's true.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Well, that's our show for this week. You can find links to get in touch with my guests in the episode description below on YouTube, or if you're listening to the audio podcast, just swipe or tap over the cover art. You can watch other full episodes and curated playlists at everythingcomestogether.com. Please subscribe to Sreenag Pictures on YouTube, or you can listen to the audio podcast by subscribing to Everything Comes Together on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and leave a 5-star review. If you like this episode, please tell a friend about it and help get the word out about this show. The music for this podcast was composed by Aashray Harishankar from Escapist Music, post-production by Thiruvikraman Srinivasaraghavan, and production assistance by Abdul Jeelani. Until we meet again with another fascinating guest, you can reach me on Instagram @Sreenag or at everythingcomestogether.com. Have a good day.